Hey, here we are. It's Easter morning. It's only 6:30, another 20 minutes before the sun rises. There's plenty of light to see. I'm sure at this point, Mary and a group of women were hustling to find Jesus at the tomb, and they were discussing who's going to roll away that stone. It's too big. It's large. There's no guys here. I don't know what they said exactly, but they were on their way to the tomb. One text in John, it says that while it was still dark. Now, some people would say this is dark out. The sun isn't up. It's cloudy this morning. It may even start raining here in a bit, so I may not have much time because I'm not very interested in staying out in the rain. But have you ever thought about it if it were raining on that day? Well, at any rate, Mary and the rest of the crew of women went. According to John, while it's still dark, I like Luke's less specific rendition. Very early in the morning. 6:30 is very early for a lot of people. In fact, most people don't get up until about 7. Mark says after sunrise. So for some people, they'd say, yep, the sun's up. But it isn't. It rises this morning at 6:50. I checked that online. Matthew says they went at dawn. I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure when dawn is, but it's pre-sunrise. And I think that they would have been out at this time by now. And what I want to do is share with you some of the experiences that happened on Easter morning when Mary Magdalene and the other women were with her, showed up and got up and went to the tomb at this time of day. They were discussing who had moved the stone. When they got there, they recognized that the stone had already been moved. That Jesus was not there. The angels, there were a couple angels there, and they told the women, I know who you're looking for, and I'm just giving you a kind of a synopsis. He's alive. The one that you look for that was crucified is not here. Remember what he said to you in Galilee, that he must die and rise again? And then they remembered, Luke says. And the angel told them, well, go to the disciples and tell them, and he will meet you in Galilee. The women were excited. I could just imagine them. Their blood flowing and just their heart beating fast, and they want to run. They want to run and tell the rest of them that Jesus is alive. Jesus met them on the way, according to the Gospel of Matthew, and he held them just for a second. He didn't actually touch them. He said, don't be afraid. Go tell them. He repeats what the angel just had told the ladies, and he said, go tell them, and they will see me in Galilee. So the women went on and told the disciples. This is the fourth thing that happened, I believe, that morning with people. They told the disciples, and the disciples didn't believe him. What? You crazy? We just saw Jesus die. He was crucified. He was not only nailed up on a cross. I mean, we saw him from a distance. They speared him and buried him. He's not alive. You got to be joking. No way. You're seeing ghosts. I would be curious to know exactly what the disciples said to the women. But Peter and John, well, let's go see for ourselves. They raced. I can just see this, a foot race. Peter gets going and John beats him to the tomb. John just stands outside, and Peter, I'm not standing here. Let's go in. I got to see what's going on here. Let's go inside the tomb. And Peter looks in, and it's empty. there's an angel, and all the clothes that Jesus was buried in are folded up neatly, laying on the stone, on the burying resting place that he would have been rested upon. And they were dumbfounded. I'm sure they were just in kind of awe, like, oh, wow, what happened? How did this happen? Matthew tells us that in that morning when Jesus resurrected, that there was an earthquake. And you know what? Matthew goes ahead and says that the angel moved the stone. I don't think Jesus needed the stone moved away to get out of the grave. Later that day, we know of other instances, he just kind of appeared. He just like walked through walls, and he just showed up without their knowing until they saw him. The stone was moved by the angel, and Jesus just, it was already gone. Jesus went right through the ground, right through the tomb, in a new glorious body, a body that we will all have. And it's very curious to me what kind of body we will get in the resurrection. This Easter 2020 has been told to us. I got an email yesterday that one of the local ministers from a past at the Foursquare Church passed away. He died. And it just makes you think and wonder what's going on with him now. I think about that with my mom and dad that have died, buried, and with other aunts and uncles, with family members, friends over the years have died, and people we know. And I wonder, what kind of body do they have now, or are they waiting and resting until Jesus' return? And what is exactly going on? Well, some of this is a mystery to us, and I think when Jesus comes back, we'll all understand. I think we'll be given wisdom at that time. But in the meantime, we have scriptures to lean on and to study and to look at for what Jesus taught and what he wants us to know. And I think from this lesson today, we can take from this that Jesus wants us to know that he's alive, that he did rise again. He did not stay in the tomb. Peter and John raced to the tomb, and I'm sure they were kind of in awe and wonderment, and I'm sure they were dumbfounded and walked back to where they were meeting and to tell the others and discuss what had happened. Mary, I think, lingered behind and just kind of wandered around in the tomb area, sad and maybe afraid, disappointed and bewildered, wondering what they had done with the body. How did this work? What's really going on? In the book of John, he tells us that Mary runs across who she thought was the gardener, and he says her name, and she perks up, and it's like, I recognize your voice. Who is this? And this is Jesus. And he tells her, talks to her, comforts her, gives her assurances, and I builds her confidence yet again that yes, he's alive, that he is well. And I know it took a while for the apostles to grapple with this idea of crucifixion. We don't know what Mary did the rest of the day. I'm sure she went back and told maybe her family, her friends, and obviously she did, because John writes about it. And then later that day, while the light is fully above them. The sun is glowing in the noonday sky, and I don't know what time, we're not told, but they were walking, and I think it's more toward evening. In the book of Luke, he tells us that disciples were walking along, two of them, and discussing what was going on, and Jesus walks along with them for a while, asks them what they're talking about, and they're telling him, hey, don't you know what's going on? This is crazy world that we live in, and there's this crucifixion, and this is the Passover, and everyone knows what went on here. What, you don't know? And Jesus talks to them and tells them some things, and then they're kind of oblivious to the fact that this is actually Jesus, and that he shares with them some scriptures and opens their eyes, and then they realize it's him, and he disappears. Mark speaks of a couple disciples. I think they're the same thing. Mark chapter 16, verses 12 and 13 speak of a couple disciples meeting Jesus. And you can see now in the background that the sun is just about up, but yet not quite. Not quite. I think Mark and Luke are speaking of the same thing. They just tell it differently. And I'm going to speak to that in just a second. But last appearance, and there's 8 different events, I think, that really go on with Jesus and people that day, with their idea of what should happen. Jesus shows up in the upper room, or I call it that, in the room where the disciples were. And in Luke, I think this is the same thing that we find in the Gospel of John. And Luke, we find them after the road to Emmaus, they went and ate, and then Jesus showed up and ate with them. And I think that's what the Gospel of John is portraying in chapter 20, starting with verse 19. Jesus appears in the room and eats with them, and he shows them who he is, and he talks with them and assures them that he is not a ghost. He is not just a spirit or a figment of their imagination. Or rather, Jesus is real and he's alive. What is really cool, I think, is that Jesus spoke and interacted with his followers over the course of the next 40 days. And Jesus assured them and encouraged them and loved them that he, in fact, is alive. And you know what? He does the same for us now. He is alive. I would like to speak to the fact that these 4 accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are all a little bit different. And there's a new guy to me. He's not new. He's about my age, but his name is James Werner Wallace. And Mr. Wallace is a police officer in California, I believe in Los Angeles. And as a police officer, he often deals with eyewitnesses and accounts of what's going on with people, with a crime, sometimes a murder, and sometimes other things. But he deals with now cold cases, or for a while he did for about 15 years. And on this, in his life experience, he started out as an atheist, not believing at all that that God even existed, but believed after a while, after deciding to try his inspector skills and putting Christianity and faith to the test. He decided and recognized that Jesus and the Bible stand true. And he makes it very clear that when he ran across the different accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John of the resurrection, or any other story that they tell, that it didn't bother him at all that these things were a little bit different. And the main reason it didn't bother him is that he said, this is the way people are. They remember things differently. Not everyone's going to say the exact same story. And even in the account of the resurrection on this Easter morning, that one of them would say very early in the morning, another one said, well, it was still dark, another one says after sunrise. I mean, darkness, if you ask one person, is different than another as far as the time of day. It's got to be dark at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I was up this morning and I could actually see some sunlight. But my point being is that people remember things a little bit differently, and I tell this to some students when I teach, that if you see a wreck and you ask 4 different people what went on and who was involved and how did it happen and what do they remember, someone's going to remember the people's clothing, someone else is going to remember the cars real specifically, someone else is going to notice the event and maybe even take notes, and someone else is going to just, well, that happened, and be kind of general and not maybe very specific with much of anything, but recognize, hey, but there was a really good-looking person walking down the street at the same time. Something like that. But they all saw the same event. They're just going to remember it differently. And they're going to recount it a little bit differently, and not wrongly. And James Warner Wallace assures us through his experience of dealing with people and as eyewitnesses of an event in the past that no one ever says the exact same thing as other people. And in fact, if they do, the event, or at least the people involved in this eyewitness accounts, are suspect. And I think we can say the same is true about the resurrection. Well, it's about time, and I just want to point out the fact that it is 6:50, or just a little past. If we had a clear morning, you could see the sun peeking through the trees. But as it is, you can't because of the overcast skies. I hope you learned a little bit this morning and recognized these events. It's a great day to celebrate, and while the churches, I like this idea, that while the churches may be empty, so is the tomb, and that is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Jesus is alive, and we can have assurances that what he says is true, that he loves you, that he wants you, and he cares for us, and that God is abounding in faithfulness. Have a great Easter. Love you all, and take care.